Welcome to Literary Latte, the podcast with a Southern accent on writing. I'm Lynda Bouchard, and it's time for your jolt of literary inspiration. Summer doesn't truly begin without a Mary Kay Andrews book in your beach bag, and the prolific Mary Kay joins me in this episode to talk about her newly released novel titled Sunset Beach, as well as the fascinating backstory that helped launch her writing career. How Mary Kay Andrews got her start might come as a bit of a surprise. Her success has been driven by her ability to renovate her identity as an author and then put in the necessary work to make it reality. Today, she'll share how any author can do the same. This is a must-listen-to episode for every writer, and I'll be back to dive into all of it with Mary Kay Andrews right after this. This episode is sponsored by McIntosh Bookshop and the Beaufort Bookstore, two of the best independent bookstores in the South, located in Beaufort, South Carolina. They carry books from the Civil War era, popular fiction, and everything Southern. And they carry all of the titles by guests on this show. So be sure to stop by both locations the next time you're in Beaufort, South Carolina. Now on to the show. Joining me today from Atlanta is New York Times bestselling author Mary Kay Andrews. She's the author of more than 30 novels, including The High Tide Club, Beach Town, and Summer Rental. Her most recent is titled Sunset Beach. Mary Kay began her career as a journalist, writing for the Savannah Morning News and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Before leaving to begin writing fiction, she began as a mystery writer, but she still hadn't found her niche until a career renovation pushed her out of her comfort zone and onto the bestseller list. We'll talk about that. And Mary Kay has some great advice on writing and publishing and the secret to sustaining her prolific career. Mary Kay Andrews, I have been so looking forward to this.
I have too.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, congratulations on Sunset Beach. There is so much about your writing career that every writer can benefit from. So take us back to the beginning, if you would. You were a journalist, and so what drove that transition from journalism to fiction writing? And how did your career in journalism reporting inform you as a novelist?
I think, I went to journalism school at the University of Georgia and worked summers at a paper in my hometown of St. Petersburg, Florida. Worked on my college paper, which I think for people who are in college, I think it's a great thing, even if you're not majoring in journalism, whatever you're majoring in, if you can get an extracurricular activity like the college paper. I made so many friends. In fact, I'm having lunch with my girlfriends from those days today. So that taught me a lot. It gave me a lot of experience while I was still in college. I got out of school, got married, and worked for a paper in Savannah. And I had a pretty boring beat. It was the health beat. But I managed to, I'd always been interested in crime. I managed to occasionally jump on a crime story. At that time, I was 22, and they didn't give 22-year-old girls, cub reporters, the job to be a cop reporter. So I think I didn't know I was ambitious, but I actually was. I left there, we moved to Atlanta, and I worked for a pretty dreadful weekly paper. And then I moved to a dreadly daily paper in the suburbs. Eventually, I made my way to the big daily, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And I think that's one lesson for people. Don't be afraid to start at the bottom rung. I certainly was on the bottom rung. But if you sort of have a clear idea of what you want, what your career goals are, and my goal was to work for a big city daily, I think that helps. And so I moved to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and covered, and I should say that when I was on the suburban daily, I did cover police. And because that was an interest I had, I covered all kinds of stories, but I covered police because I'd always been interested in crime and crime writing. I had an uncle who was in the business. He was a career police officer. And so that kind of gave me the set of skills I needed later. I didn't know I would need those skills later in life. I just thought, well, I'm doing what I wanted to do. It's hard. I moved to the daily paper and for a year, and then we moved back down to Savannah for a job opportunity, and I was a stringer. Stringer's a freelancer who works on a regular basis. So I covered all kinds of stories in Southeast Georgia and in North Florida, and that I covered all kinds of stories. I covered breaking news stories. I covered drug busts. I covered organized crime trials, and just whatever came along, which was another great. I didn't make a lot of money. It was a good thing my husband had a job, but that was a great skill building exercise.
The skill that you learned while writing for the newspapers was probably meeting deadlines.
Right.
Writing short is really hard.
So
that's a great skill. And so what made you focus on the mystery writing, which is where you started?
I'd covered police and I'd covered courts. And I'd always had an interest in that. And at the time that I started dabbling in mystery, I had 2 young kids and I wanted to leave newspapers and be home with them. And so I started writing in secret. I had a group of friends who were also working in the same newsroom, and they were also writing in secret. So we met every Wednesday for lunch, and we would exchange chapters. So we had a little writing group. And eventually they just wanted to go to lunch and bitch about working at the paper. But by then I had written enough that I thought I'm going to keep going. And so I had a fire lit under me. And part of the fire was I was unhappy. I was unhappy in my job and I wanted more. I wanted to write. So when everybody else kind of fell away, I just kept writing. And one thing that I tell people who are holding day jobs and have busy careers and family is give yourself the time and space to write. And my time was the night before my writers group met. So actually our group went on Thursdays. So Wednesday nights, I didn't have a computer at home. I had 2 young kids, so I'd go back to the paper and write on their computer, which was against company policy, which made me want to do it more. And, that was something else I learned at the paper was that it turns out I have a subversive side. And the fact that it was that I wasn't supposed to do it made me want to do it. So, a friend of mine taught me the scam a day philosophy, which is that once you have a goal, and my goal was to write a book, not publish it at that point, but just to write a book. The scam a day was every day you do something, you scam the paper. Mm-hmm. So my scam would be I might go down to the paper's library on my lunch hour, and I would read magazines about writing, and I would read newspapers from other towns, big city papers. I would read the Washington Post, which had a great style section and great writers working there, to see the kinds of things they were writing about. And then, another scam might be I'd write a query letter to an agent. And another scam might be I was a features writer by that time. So if a writer was coming through town on a book tour, I'd get myself assigned to interview them. And then when the interview was over, I'd ask them questions about being published.
Right. It's great. So you used everything that was available to you, which is it's a teachable moment for writers that are listening.
Yeah.
Nothing was wasted along the way.
Yeah, I think you don't, if you wait for opportunity to come knocking at your door, it really won't. I've been writing my whole life, and nobody's ever knocked on my door and said, would you like to publish a book? Do you have anything we can buy? So I guess I was a go-getter. I didn't think that about myself. I thought, well, I've got to get out of here. I want to write a book. And how do I do that? So I taught myself. I read books that I liked, that I wanted to be like. Sue Grafton was a big hero of mine. She was a New York Times bestselling author. And I looked at books like that, and I narrowed it down. I thought, well, I'll write a mystery. I read a lot of mysteries. I'd always read mysteries. I grew up on Nancy Drew and Agatha Christie, and Mickey Spillane, kind of an oddball in that mix. And I thought I'd covered cops, I'd covered courts, and I thought this is something I could do. And then I narrowed it down even more. I knew I couldn't write a police procedural novel because I didn't have time to research that kind of a novel. So I thought I'll write what's called a cozy mystery, and I'll have an amateur sleuth. And I created an amateur sleuth. Her name was Callahan Garrity. She was a former police detective for the Atlanta Police Department, but she'd left that job, as I eventually left mine, because she couldn't get ahead. And she opens a cleaning business called the House Mouse. And so that's what I was writing. I wrote one book when I was working with my writers group. It was set at a fictional newspaper in Savannah. And that was the book I was working on during the time I was still working at the paper.
So what happened to that?
It never got published. That was my apprenticeship. I learned that I could write a book. I learned that, and here's what I said to myself. I thought, well, I can't write a book, but I could write a chapter. And a chapter is the equivalent of a long Sunday reader piece for the newspaper. So that was about 10 manuscript pages. And that format still works for me today. I still do that. I think of a chapter as 10, sometimes less, sometimes lots more. But I thought if I can just break it into bite-sized chunks, then yes. I can, because otherwise you're looking at a giant, a mountain that you'll feel like you'll never scale. But if you just think about, well, I'm writing a chapter, I started with a synopsis. I knew that much about writing a novel, especially commercial fiction, which is what I write. I started with a synopsis and a premise. And that first novel, I never sold, but I finished it. And that, to me, was as important as the first bestseller and the last bestseller that I've had. The idea that I set out to do something that I was desperate to do, and I did it. I wrote nights and weekends for a year. I gave myself a deadline, and I think that's something everybody needs, is a deadline. I told myself, you have 1 year to write this book. I still had a ways to go. So I took 2 weeks of unpaid leave from the paper so I could stay home and write. My youngest was in preschool for half a day. My daughter was in school. And so I didn't get paid for those 2 weeks, but those were really important weeks for me. I finished the book at midnight on the day I had to go back to work.
So what was that point then, Mary Kay, when you said, okay, I'm going to leave this newspaper career behind and just dedicate myself to writing full time and go for it?
I think it was the point in my career where I wanted to change departments. And I went to my features editor, and he said no. And so I went over his head to the paper's managing editor. And he sat me down and he said, you need to understand that we need real writers in the news department. And you're not really a good writer. You don't have any discernible style. You need to understand that you are an adequate reporter. And so that's what you need to do. And that, for me, was the light bulb moment. Mm-hmm. I needed someone to say, you can't do it. And I cried.
Wow.
And I went to another editor friend, and he said, you're actually a very good writer. And so I thought, all right, I'll show you. People ask me, have you ever sent the managing editor moved to another paper? He's now long retired. And people always say, well, did you ever send him the bestseller list with your name on it? And I said that, because I don't need to. What's important to me is I know. He doesn't have to know. I know. And that's, believing in yourself is, that was a turning point for me. I thought, well, if the bosses don't believe in me, nobody's going to believe in me until I believe in me. And that's sort of my mantra.
And so you started with mysteries.
I did.
And then you shifted to women's fiction.
Right.
And in your most recent books, you blend the two, Mary Kay. So what inspired you to go back to your mystery roots, and how are you liking that?
I write what's called women's fiction, which I kind of resent. They never call mainstream fiction boys fiction. But okay, I'll take it. I wanted to write a different kind of a story. There'd always been an unspoken mystery, an underlying mystery in all the Mary Kay Andrews books. And with, I think it was The Weekenders, my editor and I at St. Martin's Press, she's amazing. And we were talking about what my next book would be. And she said, I want you to write a book called The Weekenders. I don't care what the story is. I just want it to be called that. And then she said in a kind of offhand way, and if you want to kill somebody, that's okay. And I said, now I've got permission. So, there's a mystery at the beginning of a mystery thread throughout that book, The Weekenders. And that book did very well, which sort of gave me permission to continue with Murder and Mayhem.
If you are just joining us, my guest is Mary Kay Andrews, who delivers this summer's blockbuster with her newly released novel, Sunset Beach, a story about friendship, murder, love, and secrets in an impossibly gorgeous setting. After we take a short break, we'll talk about the book tours, the trick to writing a book a year, and she'll offer up some great advice for every writer. I'm Lynda Bouchard, and this is Literary Latte. Don't go anywhere.
Psst. Hey, author. Summer is just around the corner, and that means road trips and being on the go. So now is the perfect time to make your book an audiobook, portable and deliverable from Amazon, Audible, and iTunes, so your readers can take it along with them wherever their imaginations roam. Audiobook.Solution.com is the answer. So get started today and give voice to your written words. Just visit Audiobook.Solution.com and schedule a 15-minute free call to learn more. And be sure to mention that you heard it here on Literary Latte. That's Audiobook.Solution.com.
Let's get back to my interview with New York Times bestselling author Mary Kay Andrews, whose new novel, Sunset Beach, ushers in the summer season. Before the break, Mary Kay, we were talking about your unconventional path to becoming a bestselling author. And a big part of that is connecting with your readers. You're very active on social media, but authentic engagement with your fans is also important to you. And it seems that fewer and fewer authors are going out on book tours these days, but you're the exception to that.
The publisher makes that decision, and I've never not toured. I enjoy it. I know I have author friends who get beat down on the road and don't think it's worth it. But to me, book tour is the dessert after a really long, hard dinner of, yucky, mushy vegetables. I love engaging with my readers and fans. I love meeting booksellers. And that to me is just joy. And don't get me wrong, it's hard work. I mean, some days I'm in a different city every day. Some days I do 2-a-day events. But for me, it's real. And I love hearing what readers connect with. I mean, when you meet a reader face to face, they tell you what they're thinking about, what they like about your books. And I've actually gotten story ideas from stuff that fans tell me on the road.
Take us on a typical day on a tour with Mary Kay Andrews.
Well, I do a launch party every year in Atlanta where I live, and we do it as a fundraiser. And that's on Sunday before launch day, official launch day. Monday, I go down to Savannah and do a second launch there. Then I typically go to Raleigh, where my husband and I lived for 3 years. So I have a nice fan base there. And there's a great indie bookstore there, Quail Ridge Books. And I should say that, independent booksellers are such an important part of the success of any authors these days. Yes, people can buy books online cheaper and easier, but booksellers really are the ones who curate and they hand sell your books and they support authors like me, just when I was first starting out even.
You release a book every year, like clockwork. And so how do you maintain that schedule so that your fans are assured that their summer will start with Mary Kay Andrews?
Well, I have to start, I'm already working on next summer's book, summer 2020. I have a synopsis, which I've worked on, and my editor and I have talked back and forth about that a lot. My literary agent is really involved in every aspect of my career. And that, I think, is an important thing beginning writers don't understand. Some agents just do a book deal. They take your work, they sell it to a publisher, and then you and your editor work on the book. But I really enjoy the collaborative process. So my editor and my agent, we just met in New York last week. We talked about this next summer's book, bounced ideas back and forth. We brainstorm. And then it's my job to go home and start writing. And it's kind of hard because I have a business. I'm incorporated. It's a business. I do a lot of social media because, as you said, it's important to connect with my readers. I set myself writing goals. A 2,000 word day is a good day. And I write. Now, there are days I'm not writing. There are days I'm doing research. There are days I'm traveling for research. My next book is going to be set on the Alabama Gulf Coast. So I'm getting ready to go down there and research the setting of that book. But when I'm really writing hard and fast, I might put my laptop beside my bed so that when I roll out of bed in the morning, that's the first thing I do. Before the day attacks me, I attack the day. I write.
That should be a bumper sticker.
I start writing longhand in a composition book or a yellow legal pad, and I'm asking myself questions. What do you need to write today? What happens? How do you get over this plotting problem? And eventually, when it starts flowing, then I jump on my laptop and I open a document and I start working. And it just hopefully goes from there.
Do you ever get writer's block, or do you believe in that?
I don't allow myself to believe in it. I know it exists, but not in my world. In my world, I have a deadline. I have a book a year. And writer's block for me is laziness or fear. There's a lot of fear and self-loathing in writing, or just putting things off. So at some point, I have to put my butt in the chair or in the bed.
Right, and there's no magic bullet.
No.
You just have to do it. You just have to sit down and do it.
Right. And lots of times I write what Anne Lamott in Bird by Bird, which is kind of my Bible, and what Anne Lamott calls shitty first drafts. I mean, that's why you have a delete button. I'll write and I'll say, yeah, that works or that doesn't work. And
I think that it was Stephen King, if I'm not mistaken, Mary Kay, that said, "There's no such thing as great writing, only great rewriting."
Right. I hate rewriting, but I know how necessary it is.
Yes, right. And your editor too is so important.
Yeah.
And is that painful for you when an editor cuts things out, or do you appreciate it and say, yeah, that makes it better, or is it hard still?
Well, if there's something I really loved in a book, I can make an argument for it, but I have an incredibly trusting, close working relationship with my editor. We both want the same thing. We want the best book possible. And that's the goal we're both working toward. And I trust her taste. So when she says, cut this chapter, you're just talking to yourself here. Generally, I take her advice and I try it. Yeah, I probably could. I have the clout that I could maybe overrule her. Or sometimes I do make an argument for what I've done. But it's really important to me that I listen to her. She's got a great track record. She's edited lots of huge best-selling authors. And so I know she knows her stuff.
Right. And there's that trust between you. And it is a collaborative effort. Writing a book, it takes a lot to get it out there in the world.
It does. And your editor and your agent and everybody at the publishing house, they're your partners. They're your team. And I really believe in that. I believe strongly in that. And saying thank you to those folks and having a relationship. They're not some faceless thing in New York. We're all on the same team. We all want the best book possible.
Mary Kay Andrews, you are such an example for every writer. And I hope writers listening to this are taking notes, because Mary Kay Andrews started right where you are now. Most writers begin not knowing what the heck they're doing.
I still don't know.
There you go. Well, you have given so much great advice in this episode to writers. What is the best writing advice you've ever received?
Well, I did a work with Sue Grafton, my mystery hero, in 1990, and everything she taught me has carried with me. The thing I have kind of developed over the year, my motto is enough with the rewrite, enough with the revisions. At some point, you're not going to sell the most polished paragraph in the world. So my motto is you can't fix what you ain't wrote. After, there comes a time in the life of a manuscript where you just have to keep writing, and you have to believe that your story is strong enough, and you'll never get to the end if you keep backing up. So yes, revision is absolutely necessary, but what I do is I get the book down, I get my first draft, I write it, I keep going, and then I know that I can go back and revise. But if I revise every day, every chapter, every page, I'll never get to the end of the book.
Great advice. Mary Kay Andrews, what a treat. Thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you.
Sunset Beach is published by St. Martin's Press. And I'll have more about Mary Kay Andrews in the show notes, along with a link to her website, where you can find her book tour schedule, speaking engagements, and maybe even her favorite shabby chic discoveries for Literary Latte. I'm Lynda Bouchard. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your tribe, and be sure to go to Apple Podcasts to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Join me next time for another Southern-laced literary conversation.
You've been listening to Literary Latte with Lynda Bouchard. For more information, visit bookingauthorsinc.com.